If you don't have cash flow and you've got all these properties and they're draining you cash, you're going to go bankrupt. Having a very, very good property manager is key. Passive income doesn't really exist. Hey guys, in this video, I want to go through the hard truths of owning a property portfolio and also the truths of passive income. People often talk about passive income, but it's actually not really passive. If you think about property investing, there's a lot of things that we need to do as investors and also landlords to upkeep the property, maintenance. You've got tenants to manage, you've got property managers who need to go into the properties to do inspections and routine inspections. These are all things that are related to maintaining and upkeeping a property. So it's definitely not passive. What you are led to believe passive income, just income coming in, requires effort. What truly is passive is not requiring any effort for you to deliver that income. I think over time you can definitely try and make it as passive as possible, but it still requires effort. So the truth is, passive income doesn't really exist. To get to true passive income, you really got to have good systems and processes in place to be able to take you away from doing any work, but it still requires an input from somebody. So really it's not passive. So I want people to understand that property is not really a passive income. It's a very active investment, but there are different types of active and passive. For example, Airbnb income, that is very, very active, right? Because you really need to manage the cleaning of the property regularly when there's short-term rental stays. Long-term stays like tenants where you've got 6 months, 12 months, for example, there's generally less work as compared to a short-term, but it still works. It's still active income. So I want you to understand that property is not completely passive. It's actually very, very active. But what it does give you is leverage for you to build your asset base, for you then to have the capital to invest into other things that can be more passive. Other passive income streams can be commercial property, which will require a little bit less maintenance because usually the tenant is paying for a lot of the outgoings there, and there's less things to manage in commercial property as opposed to residential property. And other things like shares and ETFs, for example. If you're a shareholder of a company and you're just receiving dividends, that is probably as passive as you can get, right? And depending on the level of business and how you structure it, different people, you can get it to a position where it can be passive, but it still takes a lot of work. Now, I want to share some hard truths around owning a property portfolio. A lot of people idolize, having 10 properties, 15 properties, 20 plus properties. To get to that certain level, it does require a lot of work. And for me to build my portfolio from 1 property to 5 properties, I would say was relatively easy as compared to going from 5 to 10 properties and 10 to 15. That level of jump as you build your portfolio really requires 2 things. And the 2 resources that you really need to focus on building is number 1, servicing, right, which is your ability to borrow money and take on debt. That requires a lot of income and it's often derived by income. I want to be completely honest. For me to get to where I am today, at just about to settle our 15th property, it has taken me a long time. I started investing in property in 2013, so it's been 12 years of hard work and building up my income over the time to eventually starting a business. And it took me around 2 years in the business, or I had a pause of 2 years to be able to borrow money from the bank because you have to build up the business financials. And to build up the business was a whole different beast. That required working 12, 15 hours a day for 2 years, 7 days a week. So the level of people that are getting 10 plus properties, they're not earning an average income, right? They're definitely earning a lot more income and most likely deriving their income through business. Ultimately, your borrowing capacity is a function of income, and for you to get past a certain stage, you really need to continue building the income. And I always tell my clients that you really need to focus on consistently getting a higher income over time. Because not only does this increase your borrowing capacity, but it also helps you service more and more debt over time, because the more properties you have, the more debt you have, and you need to also have cash flow, right? If you don't have cash flow and you've got all these properties and they're draining you cash, you're going to go bankrupt sooner or later. You definitely need to increase your income over time because it makes holding the properties easier and easier. The second resource that you need to build a property portfolio is going to be either cash or equity. As we know, it takes a long time to save And to build up cash for a deposit on a property is also going to take years and a very long time. So the quickest way is to leverage equity from an existing property. But at the end of the day, equity is still debt. You have to remember that. When you're borrowing money, borrowing debt, you also need to make sure you've got cash flow and income to service that additional debt, i.e. equity, all right? Because it's debt on debt. So you've got to make sure that you can increase these two resources over time. If you can increase those two resources over time, it then allows you to build up that portfolio easier and faster. What I really wanted to share with you is that to build a large portfolio of 10 plus properties, the people that you see out there owning such a large portfolio, they definitely didn't make it just by a average income. They most likely would have got their income through sort of business or a very, very high paying job, but they also have to generate that equity of an existing property, or it's got to come from somewhere. It's very unlikely that they just save that money. So that's the reality behind building a very large portfolio. Now I also want to go into the behind the scene, right? So when you own that many properties, there's a lot of things that go behind the scenes. And again, this goes back to it not being passive. I can tell you there's a lot of stress because you've got potentially, like we've got 10, 15 different council rates. We've got different sets of bills, multiple property managers that we're dealing with from different states. At any one time, you just don't know what something's going to happen, right? You might get a call and they say, Jai, the hot water system blew, the aircon's broken, we've got to replace that. Jai, the bathroom you've got to fix, right? It's leaking. So I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, almost didn't get a call from the property manager. It was about a good 6-month run. And then suddenly I got a call from my property manager in Queensland saying, Jai, the bathroom in one of your properties is leaking. And it's getting so bad that the water is rotting a lot of the wood around the bathroom. And we found out that there was a massive leak and one of the pipes had gone and we just couldn't salvage anything. And they said, you need a full bathroom renovation. We had to spend about $15,000 to get that bathroom renovated, and there was only one bathroom. So the tenant was at an inconvenience. So we actually had to drop her rent by about $50 a week. Luckily, she had a friend close by that she was able to shower at her friend's place. And we were very lucky in the sense that we were able to find tradespeople to be able to get the works done within about 3 weeks' time. So the impact wasn't too bad, but it was an inconvenience for the tenant, as you can imagine. So we had to drop the rent by $50 a week, which impacted cash flow, and we had to also spend about $15,000 to do that bathroom renovation. So that's just a bit of behind the scenes. And I always tell people, when you're building a large portfolio, you do need to have buffers in place for stuff like this, because you just don't know and can't expect when things are going to go wrong, right? Some days, there's no news, which is good news, but there's some days where you get calls and they're not the best type of calls. So you need to make sure you've got buffers in place as you build a larger property portfolio. One thing that we also saw is interest rate rises. Who would have guessed that interest rate rises would have gone up 13 times during the last couple of years? Don't think many people saw that. Right, so the people who weren't prepared and the people who didn't have the buffers, unfortunately had to sell during those times, right? And if you sell during bad times, you generally are not going to get a good price. So that's why I always tell people, when you build your portfolio, having buffers, having a rising income is going to protect you from bad times. And you want to weather the storm, because when you're building a portfolio, you also want to make sure you're riding the good times, but also riding the bad times. Because when you come out of the bad times, generally you follow through strong growth. That's a bit of behind the scenes. The maintenance side of things is a lot of work, right? Especially when you have older style properties. It doesn't always apply to older properties. I think new properties that are poor build can also have issues very quickly. But generally speaking, the longer you hold a property and the older it becomes, there's going to be more wear and tear. So if the bathrooms and the kitchens are original from when they were built, it's very likely that after 30, 40, 50 years, that something is going to give. So these things need to be factored in. And one thing that I always like looking at is the BMP report, which is the building and pest. Because when you buy the property, you can have a very good understanding of what in that property potentially needs fixing in the short to medium term. Because that can then help you understand, what do I need to factor in terms of buffers and also cost to do some of those maintenance repairs. And also understand what's priority and what's low priority, that you can decide on what to fix now or later on. Right, so property really is not a passive income. It's very, very active work. Definitely not easy. If it was easy, everyone would be doing this and everyone would be rich, right? But unfortunately, not the case. But it's part of the game, and it's also part of making money, right? It's a cost of doing business. If you're willing to spend the money, and you're willing to be patient and put in the work, look after your tenants, look after your property, over time, house prices will go up, and that will follow with growth, and then rental income goes up as well. So what people see as the end result of people living their best life on passive income, that came through lots and lots and lots of hard work and patience and maintenance of their properties, right? So the reality is you've got to make sure that you can sustain this, and not everyone is built for it, right? I totally understand some people get really stressed out and anxious when they hear things are broken, they've got to replace and repair things. You've got to be able to deal with the mental stress and also deal with the situation as it comes up, and having a very, very good property manager is key, because a good property manager will help you understand how do you manage this process, try to remove the emotional stress away from you, deal with it in a way that's going to help you provide a solution that's cost effective and allow you to continuously get cash flow from the property, because that's what investors want. We want to make sure that we've got a tenant paying, we can meet the cost, and that the property is looking after itself as well. So that's a little bit of insight for you guys to just realize that property is definitely not a passive thing, right? Building a large portfolio comes at its costs, and these are some of the things that I wanted to share.